Can a 50-year-old Moto Guzzi make it across Canada? And perhaps, just as important, make it back? This is what I pondered as I set out, heading for my first night at friend Ken and Joseph's house in Webwood, where Ken made an extension for my windscreen and generously let me ride both his Nipa combos. So far, things were going well. The bike was running smoothly, and I'd opted to take the quieter inland route to Chapleau and Wawa along the Mississauga River. I'd ride the Lake Superior coast on the way home, assuming I got home. At Wawa, I rejoined the Trans-Canada Highway for the long haul across the top of Lake Superior. The scenery is grand, and despite a few sprinkles of rain, it was a pleasant ride. I'm about 100 yards in off Highway 17, a little bit west of Rossport, sort of getting closer to Thunder Bay. I've decided to camp for the night. It's going to get down to about 3 degrees, so that's fine. I've got plenty of warm gear. And I'm camped down this little lane and very close to a spot that's clearly well favoured by wolves. There's piles of wolf shit all over the place, and even some tracks in the soft mud on the road. I think they're not fresh, but if you don't hear from me for a few days, come and look at the wolf shit, see if there's any bits of nick in there. The forecast was for it to get down to about 3. And last time I looked, 3 was above freezing, and it's not above freezing now. Still, although it was a chilly start, it was a glorious morning with clear skies and wonderful views over the north shore of Lake Superior and the interior lakes. I just had to stop because I'm riding on this Road 44 in Manitoba. It's used to be the old Highway 1, and it's absolutely fabulous. It's full of curves, the road surface is shit, it's all bumps and frost heaves, and it's just so much fun. It's a fabulous road. It's not what you expect from Manitoba at all. Then it started to rain, and it rained all the way to Pinawa. Why Pinawa? Way up there near the Ontario border? It was the only motel I could find for miles, and there was no way I was camping. Well, this is a great start to the day. It's been raining all night by the look of it, and everything is soaking wet. Oh well, such is life. Pinawa, as I soon discovered, is the deer capital of Manitoba. The damn things were everywhere. On the hospital lawn, near the shopping mall, and all around the motel. The town's been invaded. But I had miles ahead of me, so rain suit on, I hit the highway. I wish I'd been able to give Manitoba closer attention, but with floods causing road closures and continual rain, I opted just to grit my teeth and head west, arriving in Yorktown, Saskatchewan 340 miles later. Not my longest day, but one of the toughest. It's another wet, cold, damp, blustery day. So what's new? If you've been wondering where's the video footage of me riding, it's a sad story. Any footage I took during these first few days was on a camera I subsequently lost. But keep watching, there'll be some eventually. By the way, despite the rain, the 1972 Guzzi just kept plodding along, never missing a beat. If yesterday was bad, this one was worse. Heavy rain, strong side winds, and over 500 miles till I reached my destination in Lethbridge, Alberta. In Lethbridge, I was generously hosted by Thomas and his family. In the morning, we replaced my leaking exhaust gaskets, did an oil change, and a few other minor tweaks. So we'll just pull that oil out of here.
Okay, so I've got a bucket right here.
Once the bike work was done, we headed over to the head-smashed-in Buffalo Jump and Waterton Lakes National Park in Thomas's truck. Both were truly fabulous. To my great delight, we saw a grizzly, fortunately at a suitable distance, snow-covered mountains, and bighorn sheep. In the morning, Thomas led me towards the mountains, stopping off at some local attractions along the way. My clutch was sticking and grabbing in a most disconcerting way. The cable was frayed. Luckily, I'd brought a spare. It took only a few minutes to change it in the shadow of this Tonka toy. At Fernie, Thomas turned back, leaving me to wind my way through Cranbrook and Creston, then up the side of the delightful Kootenay Lake. For once, the weather was with me. Magnificent day. This was some of the best riding so far. Curvy road, beautiful scenery, soul-satisfying bike, the perfect mix. Crossing Kootenay Lake on the free public ferry was magical. Those who live in this area truly have some magnificent riding at their back door. My accommodation for the night was a bit bizarre, but on this kind of trip, you learn to roll with the punches. If I had thought the previous day's riding was excellent, it was nothing compared to this day. Thomas had suggested I take Highway 31 from Kelso west towards Trout Lake and the ferry over to Shelter Bay and Revelstoke. Actually, he'd suggested a couple of options, but this is the one I chose. And it was perfect. The road soon turned to gravel, winding alongside the river for miles. Along the way, I stopped to take a few pictures, but they don't even come close to conveying how delightful and impressive was the scenery, and how much pleasure I was getting from riding my old Guzzi in this part of the world. Another ferry ride, this time across Upper Arrow Lake. Some fine chats with other riders, then on through Revelstoke and Salmon Arm to Chase for the night. After a brief stop in Kamloops for a coffee at Tim's, the road followed the Thompson River Valley. It was noticeable that this land was significantly drier than parts I'd seen before. We were entering the semi-desert area. I don't know whether this counts as the Badlands, but it was pretty arid, and even though the Thompson River was just down in the valley, apart from scattered sagebrush, there wasn't a whole lot of vegetation. Eventually, after miles of pleasant riding, I came down off the uplands into the massive Fraser Valley and the town of Lillooet. From Lillooet, it's a steady climb into the mountains, gradually leaving the arid rain shadow world behind and entering a cooler environment of coniferous forests and towering peaks. The Duffy Lake Road between Lillooet and Pemberton is well known to many motorcyclists. It's a stunning piece of road, with tight bends, impressive vistas as it rises up to its highest point at Cayush Pass at 1,291 meters, or 4,235 feet above sea level. Not surprisingly, it's often closed because of snow, avalanches and rockfalls. The Guzzi may not be fast, but its torque made riding up these steep slopes effortless. And if I arrived at a corner in the wrong gear, as sometimes happens, it would just thud its way around anyway. As I rode higher into the mountains, I picked up a couple of other riders as the weather started to deteriorate. I was quite content to follow them, as by this point my rear tyre was almost completely bald. And anyway, they were keeping to sane speeds for the conditions. Eventually, though, at the top of the pass and on all the surrounding peaks, there was still snow. It made me feel quite at home. It was a holiday weekend. The Sea to Sky highway was choked with traffic crawling back to Vancouver. After a few minutes of crawling myself, the clutch was becoming truculent, so I pulled over to give it a chance to cool before proceeding to the ferry. There's always something magical about crossing by ferry. Sadly, this is where I lost the GoPro 3 with much good footage, but these things happen, especially to careless me. After landing on Vancouver Island, 100 kilometers of highway brought me to Guzzi Mecca and a night with Sean and Claire. Before we could go anywhere, I really needed to change that rear tyre. Fortunately, I had the tools, and Sean had anything I'd forgotten to bring with me, so it was a simple job and didn't take more than, well, a little more time than it shows in the video here. Once the tyre was inflated and determined not to be leaking, we headed off across Vancouver Island. By this point, I'd decided that my goal was to reach the Pacific Ocean. I'd been at the Atlantic, or at least the Gulf of St. Lawrence at Gas Bay a few weeks earlier, so this really was like riding across the whole country.
Or at least, most of it. It was a chilly, damp ride. There was a bit of traffic and some impressive roadworks, but none of this dampened our spirits, and we reached the Pacific coast and Tofino in time for a late lunch. After a most pleasant stay with Sean and Claire, it was time to roll again. Most other options involved riding through Vancouver, which I intended to avoid, but it was no hardship to retrace my steps back across the ferry, then back up the Sea to Sky and Duffy Lake roads to Lillooet. The roads were dry now. It was acceptably warm, and the road was even more enjoyable without the rain. By the time I crossed back to the mainland and ridden to Lillooet, I'd had plenty for the day. Lillooet's a pleasant little town with a broad main street and the impressive Fraser River below. I could live here, if I didn't think the potential for landslides, avalanches and forest fires wouldn't terrify me. A little more backtracking to Cache Creek, then north to 93 Mile House, a right turn to Little Fork, then through increasingly eyeball-stimulating country to Tete Juan Cache, and a little cabin for the night.
Well, cheers everyone. This has been a great trip so far.
Somewhere along my travels, I promised myself I'd ride at least part of the Icefields Parkway before turning for home. But as I rode through Mount Robson Park, the rain started, and by the time I got to Jasper, it was time for a proper breakfast. I'd found carefully avoided Edmonton and Calgary. By now you know my disdain for cities, and took in the first part of the parkway from Jasper south to Saskatchewan River crossing and the David Thompson Highway. But what can you say about the Icefields Parkway that hasn't already been said? It's big. It's spectacular. No pictures I was able to take could possibly do it justice. And of course, at the highest point of the Columbia Glacier, it rained. Hard, cold rain. A couple of guys I'd met at the waterfall had caught up with me, so we rode together for a few miles, stopping for a coffee shortly before I was to turn west. Delightful guys, one from New Zealand and one from the UK. Their take on Canada? It's so far to everywhere. I had assumed that as soon as I turned onto the David Thompson Highway, I'd be leaving the mountains behind and with it the dramatic scenery. That was true eventually, but not for quite a few glorious miles. And then, quite suddenly, I was out of the mountains, riding through level forest that looked a lot like northern Ontario, until beyond Red Deer the world looked like the Alberta you imagine. I hadn't been able to take in much of the prairies on the way west because of the rain. Now I was staggered by its openness, its vastness, and its surprising variety and charm. The land seems to stretch out forever, but the world is dominated by the sky, which seems to extend in an enormous arc from horizon to horizon. Before long I was in Saskatchewan, land of grain elevators, massive farms, and dealerships filled with multi-million-dollar tractors. The motel I stayed at in Theodore was interesting, to say the least, but it was worth every bit of the $45 I paid for the night. By now, I was like a horse who smells the hay in the barn. If I pushed on a bit, I could be in Ontario by nightfall. After that, just 3 more days and I'd be home. Discouraged by yet more rain, I barely stopped to take pictures and hammered across Manitoba, reaching Vermilion Bay before it was dark. I had to stop briefly at the side of the road to replace a fuse after my lights went out, and the exhausts were starting to get noisy again. But other than those minor things, the Eldorado was rocking along. Day 16 was a blur of trees and rock cuts, memorable only for the colossal thunderstorm that I thought I could outrace from Thunder Bay, but which caught up with me just before Nipigon. Tim's to the rescue. I sat inside the crowded coffee shop with a couple of riders from the States who, like me, were in no hurry to get drenched. It was only a short ride to Sault Ste. Marie, where I'd be spending the evening with relatives, so I dawdled down the Lake Superior coast, drinking coffee at Robbins in White River, and turning off the highway to visit Magpie Falls near Wawa, something I'd never done before.
I was looking for a nice quiet place to do a little photo and selfie. This is neither quiet, but it is nice. So I'm going to have to do instead.
I often stop at this beach when riding this way. It's good to stop sometimes and pay attention to the little things. Then, after an enjoyable evening, there was just the long last day to ride. It's a good thing my hosts are early risers, because after the libations of the evening, getting rolling again might have been hard. Nevertheless, I was on the road shortly after 6, covering the 882 kilometers to home, according to Google Maps. Tired? Yep. Just me, though. The bike was ready to do it all again. Or so she said, as I put her in the garage. If you found this video enjoyable, you might also enjoy my books, which are in audio, paperback and digital formats, and available from Amazon. Just search for Nick Adams Motorcycle. Thanks for watching.